On today's Locked On Jayhawks, what is KU's future at point guard post Dajuan Harris?
You are Locked On Jayhawks, your daily podcast on the Kansas Jayhawks. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What's up? I'm Derek Johnson. You can find me on Twitter at DJohnsonRadio, and you can find our show. It's called Locked On Jayhawks, anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Thank you to the everydayers tuning into each and every show. Thank you for making Locked On Jayhawks your first listen every day. And on today's episode of LOJ, we're going to be talking who is the future for point guard for Kansas, because we haven't had to think about this for a while with Dajuan Harris being this veteran player for KU for multiple years. Who's going to be the guy in 2025 to 2026? We'll also get into why this season's backup center battle isn't just crucial for this year's team, but it's crucial for 2025 to 26. And then we're going to give a little bit of an update on Mass Street TBT, who advanced through the first round. Frank Mason was awesome, and they're on to the second round of that event. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel Sportsbook. Make every moment more. As playoffs wind down, the sport stops sporting like we want them to. But this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. Visit FanDuel.com to get started. We're going to start with who is KU's future point guard post Dajuan Harris. So this is something you haven't had to think about. Dajuan Harris has been a 3-year starter. This year will be his 4th year as a starter for KU. He has a 5th season where he started 2 games and was a every game player for KU. And then he had a 6th season where he redshirted in the program. This is a player who's been around for a long time. And obviously you're hoping that he has a great season to cap things off this upcoming year. But it's not just that you lose Dajuan Harris after this season. That's obviously a sizable hole that you haven't even had to think about in terms of the veteran ability and, you know, getting along or being that coach on the floor, I guess, basically the point guard is asked to do with Bill Self. But you're also going to lose Shaquille Moore, who sounds like early good returns there with that transfer. You're going to be losing Zeke Mayo. Both of those players going to graduate away. That's all 3 of your ball handlers off this year's team that are going to be playing. Now, Elmarko Jackson would be a ball handler if you were playing off the injury. But, specifically with Dajuan, that's a 4-year starter and a 5-year rotation player. So that is a big hole to fill. Obviously Dajuan isn't in the same mold as a Frank Mason, Devon Dotson, Devontae Graham, where he's like this scoring guard, but he is in that mold of like the Aaron Miles that has been this pass first, like set everybody else up. So who are the candidates to possibly replace Dajuan Harris? Who could we be seeing as the starting point guard come 2025 for the first time since the starting point guard since Devon Dotson back in 2020 or 2019-20, or I guess it would have been Marcus Garrett in 2020 to 21 would have been your last starting point guard before Dajuan Harris. Well, Elmarko Jackson was the name I just brought up. That was one where, had Elmarko not gotten injured in that camp scrimmage and played this season, and let's say Elmarko gave you 10, 15, 20 minutes per game, right? Somewhere in that range, and he showed some good flashes, I think you would have felt okay going, okay, our starting point guard is going to either be Elmarko or, this newcomer player we bring in, but we feel good about where the floor is at if Elmarko showed us some good stuff. The problem now is that with Elmarko getting injured, it's twofold, right? He's coming off a season-long injury. He's coming off a very serious injury to where there is no guarantee that he's going to look, like the same player right when he comes off the injury. For some guys, it takes a year. For some guys, it takes 3 months, right, of shaking the rust off. For some guys, they just never get back to where they originally were. Some guys get back to that original part right off the bat, right? We just don't know how he's going to react to the injury, which that makes things a little bit more complicated if you're Bill Self and trying to plan ahead once we get to the offseason. Now, by the time we get to next offseason, like maybe he'll have more workouts and a better idea of what that's going to look like. But specifically for Elmarko, who is a very explosive player, that could very much matter. But then the other part of it that makes this difficult is, Elmarko played a lot as a freshman, but it wasn't always great. There were definitely ups and downs of being a young freshman. And I have been someone that has been very high that I think eventually Elmarko would turn into a good player. The injury complicates things, though, because if you are Bill Self, you were saying, yeah, this year could be a year where, like I said, if he plays 10 to 20 minutes, you get an idea of, are there flashes? Are there good plays? I made a comparison earlier in the offseason before the injury to Jaden Bradley at Arizona, who played like 20 minutes per game for Arizona this past season and was behind guys like Caleb Love and stuff in the guard lineup, but still playing a good amount. But you saw a lot of games and you saw a lot of highlight moments and flashes where you were like, okay, now that they lose Colin Boswell to the transfer portal, he's just going to step into the starting lineup and you feel great about it, right? Like that could have been what Elmarko did this season. But unfortunately, you don't get to see that either. So now you're coming off an injury. And the last time we saw you, it was very up and down in your freshman season. So that certainly complicates things a little bit. If you were to tell me that, hey, we have a third-year Elmarko Jackson, that sounds great. That could be your starting point guard. But then when you say it as like, yeah, but we haven't seen him, succeed at a consistent level and he's coming off a season-long injury, it makes things a little bit tougher to just completely bank on that as being your guy. So the next category of who could be that guy who's playing point guard for you, who's starting a point guard for you in 2025-26 is a true freshman. And there are a lot of options out there for KU that they seem to be recruiting right now. This is not something that, as much as it is difficult to play point guard for Bill Self, and he has so many plays and so many sets, and it's going to be very demanding to be a freshman point guard starting for Bill Self. We've seen it before. It's not happening every year, but like Mario Chalmers started as a freshman for KU at the point guard position. Devon Dotson started as a freshman for KU at the point guard position. Both those guys turned out okay, obviously, and both of them had good freshman seasons. And even if you wanted to like count Tyshawn Taylor, who was more of like a combo guard because you had Sharon basically running point, but like, he was basically starting games. Frank Mason started I think like 3 games. Sharon Collins started like 3 games as freshman. So you could say, Dajuan Harris started 2 games as a red shirt freshman, but I'm not exactly sure that counts there. But still, point being, like, he has shown the affinity that he will do it if he has the right situation. I think it's even harder to start and play a billion minutes as a freshman center than it is as a point guard in Bill Self's system, to be completely honest. So when you look at the freshman point guards and everything, and you look at the offers, I guess, that Kansas has put out there. So there's certainly some big ones that stick out. Now, there are guys further down the recruiting list that we could get into. Like, I think Kansas has an offer out to a guy like Kingston Flemings, who's ranked 21st. Like, that's a very good point guard in the class. But I want to specifically look at the top of the board here, because I think there's some very interesting candidates. So Malik Thomas is somebody who is ranked 9th in the class on 24/7 Sports. He is a combo guard at 6'4". We've seen Bill Self have all sorts of success with combo guards. That one is interesting. Michael Brown is a 6'3" point guard. He's the 8th rated player in the class. And Michael Brown is somebody who he's maybe more of that pure point guard that I know a lot of people are very high on. Then you have Darius Acuff Jr. He's going to be committing later this week on a Friday. He is a 6'3" point guard from IMG Academy. He's the number 4 player overall in the class. Very good scoring point guard, right? He's able to get to the lane. He's got a very good quick first step. He can hit shots from the outside. He is going to be picking this Friday. Like I said, it seems like a lot of people are leaning toward it being to Arkansas. But that Kansas is a finalist, and certainly that's been an interesting recruiting battle, that one that has been, by all accounts, I don't know, volatile in a certain way, going back and forth with the camp and everything. But it seems like at this point, KU's top target is also the top guard in the class. So the number 1 overall player in the class is small forward AJ DeMonsa. Cameron Boozer, who's a power forward, is the number 2 player on 24/7 Sports. The number 3 player is Darryn Peterson. He is a combo guard, 6'5", out of Huntington Prep in West Virginia, number 3 overall recruit, number 1 at his position. He's a 99 out of 100 on 24/7 Sports. So it seemed like KU was going after both Acuff and Peterson. I'm sure one reason would be, well, we don't know if we're going to land both. I'm sure another reason would be, let's try to land both, right? Why would you not try to get as many good players as you want? Maybe from both parties, though, it's like, well, do I really want to go to a school where he's also playing? And you end up with if that happens, a Devon Dotson, Quentin Grimes situation where, like, Quentin Grimes was for Bill Self for like the under 18, under 19 USA team, or I forget if he was on the Bill Self one or if he was on just a one. Maybe those were not coinciding years, but he was basically playing a lot of like lead ball handler, and he wanted to handle the ball, and you had Devon Dotson who was handling the ball, and so it didn't end up being a great fit. Now, ironically, Quentin Grimes went to Houston, and he turned into exactly what KU was hoping he would have been next to Devon Dotson, which was like a 3-and-D wing. But at the time, he wanted to be kind of that combo guard ball handling. And maybe you didn't want to do that if you're Darryn Peterson and Darius Acuff, where you had to kind of split time. You want to be the guy. So I think if you were recruiting Darryn Peterson, he's listed as a combo guard, it would be to play point guard at KU. Now, We do know KU and Bill Self loves to throw out 2-point guard lineups. So could that lineup feature, Elmarko Jackson and Darryn Peterson? And who's the one bringing up the ball more? I don't entirely know, but that is, yes, very much a possibility. We've seen Bill Self have so much success playing combo guards at point guards that I think you feel great about that. And it seems like Peterson has been a stud. Seems like this 2025 class is going to be really good at the top. DeBonsa, Boozer, Peterson, Acuff. Like there's a lot of really good players in this recruiting class that could make for some special players. So I think that would certainly be one to keep an eye on. And then you also have to keep an eye on like the transfer portal, right? I mean, this is impossible to know who it would be, but we've seen a lot of good point guards enter the transfer portal over the last couple of seasons, right? So if you had this is just a name that just popped up in my head, Max Asmus from 2 years ago, right? If that popped up in the transfer portal, and let's say you do land Darryn Peterson, you could still bring on like a Max Asmus type in the portal if you're KU this next offseason and play Asmus next to Peterson. Like that would be a really fun lineup, or, that type of player and that type of point guard. But if you were asking me to pick, like if you were saying what is the favorite among all this, if Elmarko were healthy this season, I would honestly pick Elmarko because I would expect him to have a better sophomore season and then improve on that even more as a junior, and he'd have the trust and the system and everything. But the injury leaves me wondering where that's going to be. So because of that, I would say the favorite here would maybe be Darryn Peterson, or just in general, if you want to say freshman and transfer portal edition, where you start 2 combo guards, basically. You start, 2 point guards, basically. And it seems like KU is sitting in a good spot with Darryn Peterson. I know he has the NIL deal with Adidas. That certainly can't hurt with Kansas being an Adidas school. Who will be the main point guard? I don't entirely know. But yeah, I think my betting favorite right now might be Darryn Peterson to be the starting point guard in 2025. At the very least, I think it would be a new player, and I think it would probably be, you would have, Peterson and Elmarko, or Peterson and a combo guard or something like that. If LeBaron Philon would have stuck around, that's kind of the irony in all this. LeBaron Philon, maybe Kansas doesn't even bring on Shaquille Moore, and Philon's just playing a role on this year's team. And then you're like, in 2025, 26, it's like, okay, Philon, you have the keys to the car. You're going to play next to a Darryn Peterson or one of these other players we add to the floor, something like that. But it'll be interesting because I think Kansas is going to have much more scoring punch and ceiling at the point guard position, but it'll look very differently because the floor general, the defense, the steadiness could be lower as well with a younger player than Dajuan, but it just kind of depends on if a young freshman comes in and clicks right away, because that's always a question of how it's going to work out, as much as we like to buy into the potential. All right, let's continue on here. Why is the center battle this year for the backup center spot that could only be like 8 minutes per game? Why is it so critical, not just for this year's team, but for the following year's team with Locked On Jayhawks? This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. I love sports. I love them so much, but I never want them to stop. But as the playoffs wind down, we get fewer games and the sports aren't sporting like you want them to. But FanDuel lets me keep the sports going whenever I want. All I have to do is open the app, dream up bets anytime I'm in the mood. And this summer, FanDuel's hooking up all customers with a boost or a bonus daily. That's right. There's something for everyone every day, all summer long. You can get in on the golf tournament this week. You can get in on the Royals, just Bobby Witt, just home run bets like every game. It feels like you're going to do okay, or maybe to get a steal bet. You can do both of those on FanDuel. You can parlay them together if you want to go for the big enchilada there. You can get futures on Kansas to win over 8.5 games. You can get the future on Jalen Daniels, 30-1 to win the Heisman. You can get the future on Kansas to make the college football playoff at 6-1 odds. Futures on the Chiefs. So head over to FanDuel.com and start making the most out of your summer. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the Locked On Podcast Network. Thank you to the Everydayers tuning into each and every show. We're going to have Phil Steele on with us on Wednesday's edition of Locked On Jayhawks. Tomorrow's edition of the show, we're going to be talking ceiling versus floor possibilities and expectations for KU football in 2024. So make sure you subscribe to the show anywhere you get it. And don't forget, you can check out all across our Locked On Podcast Network, including Locked On Sports 24/7 stream that's going on each and every day. Okay, why this season's backup center battle is crucial, not just for this year's team, but beyond. I think what Connecticut has shown us really the last 2 years, but I think even more so the one 2 years ago. I mean, this year's team, Samson Johnson was a very good backup for sure. But I think of it even more the year before, because the year before you had Adama Sanogo, who was the Final Four most outstanding player, and Donovan Clingan, who was a top 10 pick in this year's draft and probably would have been a lottery pick had he left the year before that as your two centers. And even though Klingon is only giving you, 10, 12, 15 minutes in a given game off the bench, it was a very impactful minutes off the bench for him that you basically had the best center on the floor for all 40 minutes of the game. That wasn't always the case last year for KU. And I think you have an opportunity to maybe go more of that mold. I mean, if Flory Bidunga hits right away, like it's going to be hard to say that another team has a better backup center than what Kansas does, right? Or if Zach Clemence comes into his own in his fourth year in the program as a former top 50 recruit, right? That's about as good of a backup center, if, again, that hits, as anybody would have. So even though Hunter could end up playing 28, 30, 32 minutes a game, which would mean you only have 8 to 12 minutes as a backup center position, those can be crucial minutes. And that's not even counting. We had the conversation last week, if you're an everydayer, you heard it, with Nick Short talking about what if Flory does play next to Hunter Dickinson for a handful of minutes per game, right? Then there's even more minutes to kind of talk about. So it's obviously very helpful and crucial in 2024. But I think beyond that, the Hunter Dickinson graduates at the end of the season. And you look at the center position for KU come 2025 to 26. Like KJ Adams graduates too, so you wouldn't even have the option of playing him as a small ball 5. That means that you would be in 2025-26 as far as what you have on the roster right now. You have Zach Clemence, who would be at that point a redshirt senior in 25-26, and you have Flory Bidunga, who would be a sophomore at that point in time, which means whoever wins the backup job this year has the upper hand. They are already ahead in the competition for 2025-26. And there could be reverberations around that, right? If you're Zach Clemence and you get beat out by Flory Bidunga this year, and you're going, okay, well, I'm heading into my redshirt senior year in 25-26, and I know Flory's going to play in front of me, even if I know now I have a role on the team because I've slid up in the depth chart with Hunter gone. Maybe I'd rather transfer somewhere else. Or if you're Flory even, right, and Zach Clemence beats you out, maybe that's a little different because you still have years in front of you, but like that could have reverberations. What if Kansas does go into the portal and adds another center? What if Kansas does land a center? There's a couple centers they're going after in the recruiting class for this year, right? Like how does that kind of affect whoever loses out on the job? And then whoever wins out on the job becomes the favorite to start in 2025 to 2026. Maybe there's a chance you even start Clemence next to Flory Bidunga and if we see Clemence at the 4 and that actually works this year. I'm a little hesitant on that being able to work from a defensive perspective, but I'm a little hesitant on that working because of the idea of Clemence next to Dickinson. I think Clemence next to Flory is actually a little bit more doable because with Clemence, you play him at the 5 defensively, and Flory, who is a quicker defensive player, can maybe get out on 4s a little bit more. And then you have Flory as like a weak side rim protector when he's guarding the 4s, which would be a lot of fun. So like that lineup could actually work. And then you have Flory at the 5 offensively and Clemence at the 4. I don't know how many minutes we're going to see that this year just because like Hunter's going to play so many minutes. So you have a limited amount of minutes that you can kind of go off of there. But, even though that is a possibility, whoever does win that job is going to be the favorite to play 20, 25 plus minutes per game come 2025 to 2026. So it has a big reverberation, not just on this year, but on the year following. All right, let's finish up here. Mass Street TBT on to round 2. Big time win over Ram Up. We're going to talk about it next. Welcome back to Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page where you can like and subscribe to the show. Thank you to everydayers tuning in to each and every episode. And if you're curious what, some of these other schools across the Big 12 are doing, check out Locked On Big 12 or check out one of our Locked On shows from one of the other Big 12 schools. And you can find that throughout our Locked On podcast network. So Mass Street TBT is moving on to the second round of the basketball tournament. And they're going to be playing tonight, if you're listening to this, on Monday. So they took down their 7 seed. They were the 2 seed in the Wichita region. Ram Up, which was the Colorado State alumni, they were dominating the game. It was like a 22-point lead in the fourth quarter. And then you have the Elam ending, which once you get to the 4-minute or under mark and there's a stoppage, whichever team has more points, you add 8 to the end of it, and then that's your target score. So the target score became 81 points, and like Mass Street just started turning it over. They missed like 4 straight free throws at one point. It got a little scary at the end, but they ended up pulling away. It's also cool if you're wearing Puma shoes because the event is sponsored by Puma and you hit the game-winning shot, the Elam Ender as they call it, you win $1,000. So before Dedrick Lawson shot 2 free throws, he had to make both. He put on Kevin Young's shoes, who was wearing Pumas, and he won $1,000 for hitting it. So that was kind of cool as part of it. But Frank Mason was awesome. I mean, I posted this on Twitter, and like I never get tired of watching Frank Mason play basketball. It was so much fun. Billy Preston, though, looked really good. Like, that was really cool to see. You saw Dedrick look pretty good. The shots weren't really falling, but I thought Dedrick looked a little bit quicker than he did at Kansas, a little more spry in terms of what he's added to his professional game. And right now they're running without a complete roster. Thomas Robinson is playing in his professional league. He's playing in Puerto Rico. They're in their playoffs right now. So Kansas needs to continue to win and hope his playoffs get over with so he can join the team. Silvio wasn't with the team. I don't know why that wasn't the case. Ben McLemore, I don't believe is listed on the roster anymore. So I know he's undergoing his court case. So I'm assuming that's kind of why. And then Brandon Rush, I don't believe, played in that first game. So I don't know if he's going to be able to join at some point in time. But now they're taking on a really good opponent. You look at this bracket, and I really thought that whoever won that first game of who they're going to play between LA Cheaters and Florida TNT would pose a real threat to Mass Street in the second round. Florida TNT ended up winning by 20 points. They've got some guys who maybe had a cup of coffee or something in the NBA, like Antonio Blakeney. He had a cup of coffee. I want to say he had 2 or 3 years with the Chicago Bulls. Christopher Walker was a former 5-star recruit. I think Kansas was in on him at one point in time. Christopher Warren was a really good player at Ole Miss, and he had 27 points in that first game. Kenny Boynton, who went off for Florida for a while. Michael Forrest, who was on that FAU Final Four team. So they've got a good team. It'll be a good matchup, but they're playing tonight. We'll see if they can move on. And like I said, I will be tuned in because I get a chance to watch Frank Mason play basketball, and that's pretty cool. That'll do it for this episode of Locked On Jayhawks. You can find our show anywhere you get your podcast, including on our YouTube page. We'll be back tomorrow talking ceiling versus floor expectations for KU football in 2024. We'll be back on Wednesday with Phil Steele to talk a little KU and Big 12 football. So be on the lookout for those. And don't forget, you can check out all across our Locked On Podcast Network for plenty of more content. See you next time with LOJ.